storytelling isn't something that exists just in the corporate world. Storytelling is something you grow up with as a child.
Yeah.
The most moving moments you have as a kid would be when someone tells you a story that you understand and you listen to it and you get inspired by it. Those are the things that are formative. And I think that desire as a human being to understand the story of someone else doesn't stop when you
100%.
go to secondary school. 100%. It continues into your 20s, 30s, 40s, and probably, until your final days.
So epic. Alex, thanks for joining us. So you are the 4th out of 4 with me, Andrew, Matt, and now you, Alex, in this kind of the recurring characters in around Stories King. But it's your first time on it with us. So it would be just good to get, like, who are you, Alex? Obviously you're big in comms, like, who are you? What do you do generally? And also I think maybe finish off with what you think about Stories King.
Of course. Well, look, pleasure to be here. Obviously, we've had a relationship for must be around 6 months now and counting, and so it's good to finally get this over the line. But well, you know the story, but I've been doing comms and PR for approximately 10 years now, always on agency side. So I've worked at 2 agencies, Peregrine, the one I'm at right now, which is quite a small financial services focused agency, very specialist in asset management, and I can talk about that a little bit later. But previously to that, I was at what is now called FGS Global, which is a much bigger 20 plus agencies, offices around the world firm. And so there worked in comms and PR again on behalf of some of the largest brands across different sectors. And I think what's interesting about us meeting each other and the conversation that we've had, and indeed how that all links into Story is King, is that I'd say even in the past decade, which in the whole spectrum of communications is a short stint on the timeline, but actually the way people are communicating and how I've even witnessed it in my professional career has changed immensely. I mean, we look at the obvious factors coming into play, how digital comms have taken over as the primary focus when you look for information about a company versus the media, which still plays its role, but digital still is now kind of up front for it. And then in terms of the roles that we play for firms, and particularly in my current position, what we're finding is the necessity to tell a good story almost trumps the necessity to deliver information in the most widespread manner possible. So this idea of if we need to tell something to the world, let's scream it from the rooftops, I think has been really replaced with, let's not try influence 1 million people with some basic information. Let's try influence 1,000 people, but tell them a story that actually impacts them and makes them think in a different way and empathize with us in a different way. And so what I think about Story is King is, I think now is the time in an era of information overload, in an era of you wake up and from the second you wake up to the moment you go to bed, information is being hurled at you from your phone, from the media, from adverts all around you, from your emails. Actually penetrating that with something that is meaningful, I think can only be done via good storytelling, which is why I think we've always thought quite similarly on that front, and 100%. Kind of very interested to dive into it a little bit more today.
Yeah, and actually, you know what's, obviously I've already told you this kind of offline, and it's like, actually it was the initial conversation I had with you when we met, that actually led to me going to Andrew and saying, hey, I think we need to do this kind of style. And like Mina, our creative lead, was talking about a video podcast. Because in essence, as you know, like what we do is, let's say, it's getting better, but it has classically taken a bit of explanation, right?
For sure.
It's getting better, and with people like you kind of helping us to dissect and ask those questions around there. But it's like, I think yes, you're in comms, and I've met loads of people in comms, but actually the questions that you asked were so clear and penetrating. And I just thought, I think getting on with people like you on a regular basis would just be good to land some of the concepts, that we talk about in reality.
Because good storytelling, it has no playbook. I think that's a thing that I find every single day at work, is that, the idea of, let's say, traditional communications on behalf of corporations that I've worked with in the past. For so many years, of course, it would vary based on the information they need to release to the market. But in terms of the mechanisms by which they did it, it was always the same. It was write a press release, send a letter to your investors, organize a speech at your AGM. And by all means, these things still exist.
100%.
But I think the reason why we had such a good informed conversation is because I think I have those conversations. I'm lucky to have those conversations day in, day out with clients who are actually trying to think outside the box. They're not following a strict set of, we have to do A, B, C to communicate with people. They're actually taking a step back and think, what's special about us? Who cares about us? And then what is a story that illustrates to them that we can actually think in the same manner? And the shape that takes, there are a million variations of it. It's not just you do it via video, or you do it via an infographic, or you do it via an event. For each different company and for each different objective, it can look completely different. And so I love having conversations like this, because I think you really bring out the human elements of any business and any individual, because storytelling isn't something that exists just in the corporate world. Storytelling is something you grow up with as a child. The most moving moments you have as a kid would be when someone tells you a story that you understand, and you listen to it and you get inspired by it. Those are the things that are formative. And I think that desire as a human being to understand the story of someone else doesn't stop when you 100%. Go to secondary school. 100%. It continues into your 20s, 30s, 40s, and probably, until your final days.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think is that going to the human element is the thing that we're talking about. Because as you know, I definitely my experience in comms is definitely not to your level, right? Or at least your level in the industry. But it's like the way I think sometimes why I struggled speaking with, funnily enough, normally explaining what we do to communication professionals is actually probably the hardest. Of course. Some of the hardest people to explain with. Just to be fair, explaining what we do, kind of like how we quote unquote invest, or how we build companies, it's really hard for us to explain it to VCs as well. Because there is, as you said, there's a I think for some people they're almost maybe too good in their industry, and they've got that playbook kind of set down. But I've always tried to as you said, with analogies, look at, okay, well, essentially a company is just a legal entity, and we are human entities. And in essence, a company, it's almost like we're going into a game, to a role-playing game, and we've got an avatar that we're now behind, that we want to represent us, and we give it the same clothes and otherwise. And so if it doesn't make sense on that degree, I'm going to ask the question why. I'm going to say, well, how does that mirror over to there? And I just love that. Obviously, you as a different communication professional kind of go on that journey and have those conversations as well. I
hadn't thought about it the way you've framed it there, which is really nice. But you're right. It's like, I think particularly now it's so pertinent when to view a company not as the be all and end all entity, but more as like an intermediary between
100%.
The people who founded the company, the people who work at the company, and then the end user. And I think in particular now, it's such a good time to have this conversation. And we spoke about this again offline just before, but I'd say this might be generalizing, but I would guess 2 decades ago, generally speaking, if you looked up a company or you saw their materials and their visual branding was convincing, right? It looked good, it felt good. You could, with a decent degree of certainty, probably make the guess that company is legitimate and they actually have something behind them. Probably because the barriers to entry for good design were higher. So in order to get a really good brand and something that looks compelling, or a website that looks great, it must have been very difficult to fake that to some extent. I think that's changed massively nowadays. Any company who has £100 in their pocket can go online and very quickly, either using an AI design tool or just hiring a freelancer very briefly, can make themselves look like a legitimate organization. We see that even in my sector of work, in the asset management sector. You have these new firms pop up, and you look at them and they've got this vibe of someone who's been around for 100 years, or they have a vibe of a firm which is so technologically advanced that you'll never understand what they're doing. But then you dig a little deeper and there's nothing there. And so going back to your point of viewing companies as intermediaries, the real stories lie in the people who found them and the people who work there and turn up day to day. And I've seen this so much with, for example, huge private equity firm who we don't work with, but we admire immensely, Blackstone. With their communications, they don't necessarily need to be marketing themselves that aggressively to the sense that they've achieved such huge market share. They're so popular. But if you go on their LinkedIn nowadays, or you go on their website, the primary focus of a lot of their communications is putting human beings at the center of it and letting them tell their stories, whether that be an analyst talking about their journey to work and what that makes them inspired to do when they arrive at the office, whether that's going to the site of one of the companies they've invested in and interviewing people and asking them, well, what's changed since Blackstone has invested in you? How do you feel? What's the impact on the local community? In some ways, the way firms are communicating has flipped, whereby the actual story about the company is now becoming secondary to the story about what the company is doing and who works for it. So it's sort of impact first communications rather than just going out and saying, we are X company, that should be enough for you to be convinced by us. It's not. You have to tell a story that really is compelling.
100%. And it's interesting, you know, just stepping back to what you said in terms of, and I 100% agree, in terms of that barrier now. The barrier is so low to looking decent. So it's almost like, you know, and obviously, you know, we've spoken a bit about Africa as well, and I think when you go to maybe Africa, where I always say the branding floor is much lower, or you know, maybe some other areas, you might say South Asia as well, you know, it's almost like when you can't reach this level, which is basically AI found some template somewhere on WordPress and put it up, and then filled in the, you know, about page with, you know, just took lorem ipsum off and put something else on. When you can't feel that, that there's such a gulf that you're just straight away put really low under, you know, below the standard. But it's interesting because what I remember speaking to, actually it was a finance firm recently, a small outfit in Canada. And I was introduced and I was really interested to speak to them. And one of the reasons I was interested to speak to them is because when I looked at their website, it looked different to other finance websites. So I almost liken it to this, right? It's kind of like on a human side now, you've got somebody who goes, oh, I'm really, you know, I'm, you know, a teenager. I'm really unique. I'm different. I'm a goth. Right? And it's like, okay, but you look like all the other goths, and shock horror, it's the trend of goth, which is anti-establishment, which is not your parent, and maybe not High School Musical, which may have been X period of time ago. And then they've kind of taken that trend. They feel like they're different, but in React, they've gone and taken a template of what, you know, gone to the goth shop, so to speak, and taken a template of what to wear there. It's just that they're not in the super mainstream. But that's almost the way when I look at AI or a template, the financial institutions, yes, they pass this bar, or whichever industry you're in, you pass the bar of acceptable, or you know you're in the group, right? You're on trend, but actually when I look at them, they don't look different from everyone else. And it's interesting when somebody just goes and you know, sometimes it might take them a little bit below that standard, right? But actually the words and the fact that they've wanted to put a little bit of their identity in actually says a lot.
So it's that really hits on an interesting point, which we've seen recently again, and I see it a lot on LinkedIn. If you go on LinkedIn, everyone's primary within, I guess, particularly in my world, primary social media platform for putting information out. If you were to compare the posts of, let's say you got two CEOs go to a conference in Berlin, right? And they go there and one puts up a photo which looks incredibly neatly kind of proportioned. You know, maybe it's a professional shot of them outside the conference hall, and then you read their post, and it's 5 bullets, very neatly worded, saying how delighted they were to be there, how this is a really real moment of opportunity in the sector that they're investing in, etc., etc., etc. And then the second CEO takes a selfie of themselves sat at a table with some colleagues who they've known from the business for 20 years, eating a bratwurst in a Berlin beer hall. I guarantee you that the second post will get better engagement. And it's not because the second post necessarily hits all the key messages that the PR firm sat down and agreed with the CEO that they need to get out there. It's because the second one, to use your word, is authentic. It's real, and suddenly you can see that there is a human being there who is on the ground, who is connecting with colleagues, who has a personality outside of statements around the business's future, which of course are important. But I think that level of authenticity is what we're going to see so much more of going forward. And it's exactly, I really liked your point here, which is it's not about now hitting the bar of, well, it has to look up to this certain level of well-designed. I think if the photo's grainy, that almost makes me believe it more, which I think is so valuable.
Yeah, super interesting. Here's my question. Let's go to his. Communication and storytelling. We talk about storytelling all the time, and there is, again, we can keep it up here maybe and stay in the clouds, and maybe so on the podcast. I mean, I think in the last episodes we've done 3 now. Alexander the Great has come up far too many times. Far too many times. And I think we've tried to now replace him with Jordan. All right. But again, it's like, I still hold that they are normal individuals. They live, they breathe, and what have you, just like us, whether alive now or no longer. But in essence, we talk about storytelling, and you talk about storytelling. We talk about storytelling as well. But then I guess, as a practitioner, what is, what would you say is the difference between communication and storytelling, if there is one?
Well, I mean, I guess if I was to challenge the question, I would say that storytelling probably is a form of communication, right? Because when I think of communication, I think that is the delivery of information from one party to another. Generally, that's not a dictionary definition, but that's how I picture it. It's getting information from one side to another side. Whereas storytelling, I think, is a subsector of communication, which focuses not just on the kind of how do I phrase it, sort of unemotional delivery of information, which communication can encompass, but it's delivery of a piece of information about a certain company, individual, situation that is designed to evoke an element of understanding, empathy, and ultimately potentially action from the party receiving it.
100%. I would agree with that, and I'd go into your initial point 100%. The way I look at communication, I remember speaking to somebody, and you might touch on this. I remember speaking to somebody about how communication departments and marketing and otherwise are structured, and for me, I just felt like communication is a broad. Basically, it's every single thing we do. In my opinion, so sales, communication, whatever. If we want to go to that level, then just as you said, storytelling is a particular way of doing that. And I like that you touch on the emotions, right? And I think, almost if I was to throw in and maybe reinforce some of the points that you said in agreement, it's whereas I can communicate. Generally speaking, to just give information, as you said, to just, I am here or otherwise. Storytelling, I think but by including like characters and actors, or maybe just you, the protagonist, good storytelling, should I say. So storytelling in general could just be, I went down the road and otherwise, and there's a beginning and end, so to speak, a journey and a beginning and end. But good storytelling, I think, is trying to put you in trying to get you to empathize, as you said. Definitely. And trying to put you in the frame of the protagonist, right? Or however many characters that normally is a protagonist and others. And then I guess, going back to the thing that we spoke about with regards to companies, in this case now, if we talk about in the company realm, the company again is that character, right? It's the avatar of, initially it's the founders, and then eventually the whole kind of team, and then obviously it ends up being the culture. The team's then and the culture of the company. So it's then trying to take you on that journey and trying to get you to empathize with that company that is the character going through a journey.
Well,
So to speak.
I think empathy is the key word. I mean, if I was to maybe rephrase my previous answer, stories bring information to life. I think that's how I think that's how I view it, right?
Yeah.
And if we say, and information can be limited to a 3-word mission statement that a business has, like, you know, if it, let's say a pharmaceutical company has their tagline of "We save lives."
Yeah.
That doesn't mean anything until you have stories to back it up, right? Until that happens, it's what's that line in The Wolf of Wall Street? It's a fugazi.
Okay.
It's something that's floating around, which needs to be brought into reality.
Yeah.
By some kind of story. And I'll give you an example. I mean, we and I have worked, you know, with numerous companies who all want to talk about sustainability, right? So, you know, a crucial part of what they do, and quite rightly, is ensuring that the way they invest is sustainable for the world, that they are continuously lessening their environmental impact, that they are giving back to society in certain ways. It's a critical focus, and if you don't focus on that, you won't get investment from, you know, pension funds who now are under severe pressure to make sure that they invest responsibly as well. Now, when reporting around sustainability first appeared 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and started to get into the mainstream, and, you know, firms were really getting put under pressure to do so, if you looked at the sustainability reports that were being put out then, it was a very fact-based, numbers-heavy, quantitative report of these have been our carbon emissions, this is our target for making our investments in, you know, questionable sectors smaller and smaller as a proportion of our overall portfolio. But it was very much just focused on delivering the facts with very little storytelling around it. Fast forward to today, we did recently a job for a client where we looked around some of the biggest private equity firms and how they're reporting around sustainability. The majority of big firms are now going way beyond just mentioning the numbers, and they're getting into the real, actual day-to-day lives of the people they impact being the way they are. I mean, some of these firms are putting up videos in individual sections of their website talking to someone who lives in a part of the world where their companies invest, to talk about what the impact it's had, positive and negative. The report is full of pictures, actions, stories from members of the team, not just the leadership team, but those who are on the ground and helping, you know, whether it's a real estate investment, whether it's supporting a company who's starting up. But the point is that within sustainability, the whole conversation has had to move on, because I think when we go back to the point of what the stories do, I think when I'm quite a skeptic in general, but when I hear from a firm that we are innovators in...
That's because you're in comms.
Well, of course, of course. So I've got to
exactly.
But the question that always springs to my mind is, are you really?
Yeah.
You know, or if are you really, or so what? You know, if you put out a mission statement like that, my immediate reaction, for better or for worse, is to question it. And so firms, when whether it be reporting on their sustainability, whether it be a consumer brand, a clothing brand, talking about the fact that they are, empowering their employees to improve their lives or whatnot, no one or very few people nowadays believe you until you give them irrefutable evidence of doing so. And the only and best way and best form of communication is to give irrefutable evidence, is to be a good storyteller. Because if you don't do that, you're going to struggle to get people to believe you. And if people don't believe you, then you're going to struggle as a business.
So you know what's interesting, and I would say, I know what you mean with regards to, you know, obviously you speak of the financial sector and essentially trying to get stuff off of large institutions that have these ESG impact requirements, and then in essence I see people whose hands are forced, right, because of the money to move
of course.
into, and then, you know, hey, you know what, beforehand we would have just asked, hey Timmy, can you hold that camera and show something? But now it's like, okay, well, look, this is going to lead to X 100 million. So let's take a small part of that and give to a production, you know, crew or what have you. What have you. It makes sense now,
Yeah,
right? But I'm always intrigued to see, because I'm always intrigued to see people who tell stories, or let's put it this way, communicate differently for the sake of communicating
Correct.
differently.
Yeah.
So just like I said, with that financial institution I spoke to, what really interested me about so I didn't care what their AUM was. I didn't care if they actually didn't even have a fund and they were doing, a kind of syndicated investments or otherwise. My interest was, why are you, and that was literally my question, because I've just realized, it's like, why did you choose to do that, right?
Yeah.
Why did you choose to be different? And that's the super, because even when you say storytelling and the proof, 100% skeptic, proof is in the pudding. But one of the things that gets me also, and really rings my alarm bells, and I think is like a super easy way, I'd love to get your opinion on this, super easy way to stand out, is to not use the same words, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, nowadays we're in a time of AI, and before there was big data and everything, and then there was a time of disruptive, right? And and essentially, I think what people find is like a really easy way of riding the wave and getting the same people who are looking for that is to use exactly the same words. That tends to make me go ding 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 and raise an alarm bell. But if you use different words, so for example, this is super, well, still in thingy, but a new example. So if you actually check, for example, when Apple brought out the Vision Pro, right?
Yeah.
So first and foremost, they didn't use the words AR or VR specifically. There's a lot. Apple's got a lot of AI in what it does, but it hasn't used the word AI, right? And what some people have said, and I completely agree, is they're trying to, Apple is almost like the OGs for let's make up a word to describe what we're doing. And some people go, but it's like, if you make up a word, quote unquote, or, something that obviously sounds similar or otherwise, or put a portmanteau or what have you together, in essence, that to me goes, you're thinking, at least just to say we're going to be slightly different, right? Whether you are or not, you're thinking. And then secondly, it says that you are going to have to do the legwork to drive the meaning of that word, as opposed to ride the coattails of others. So in kind of landing what you're saying there, I think that share the skepticism, but I'd almost say, for me, yes, the proof is in the pudding. If you say you're going to conquer Mars, when you conquer Mars, we'll see it. But at times, I tend to believe that some people might actually want to conquer Mars if they use different words in their communication and like concepts almost.
It's a really interesting example. I mean, from my perspective, if we think about what good storytelling is as a concept, I think it's whether it be for an individual or whether it be for a business, it's like holding up a mirror to yourself. And if you try cloud that mirror with preset words and descriptors that you think will make you sound like you want to come across, you're not giving the most accurate reflection of yourself. And if we look at any business, we've had these conversations a lot about how, the Nikes of this world and whatnot. You look at any business that has really stood the test of time, they have always been unapologetically, authentically themselves. Whereas any business or individual who try to sound too much like someone else, eventually that runs thin, because that mirror kind of metaphor, I think, speaks volumes. Because if you're not coming across as being 100% genuine in yourself, and you don't have the evidence to back that up via stories of where you've come from, what your plans are, what you aim to achieve, you will eventually get found out. There isn't anyone who survives 100%. For too long. You might get away with it for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And I think the microscope under which firms get assessed nowadays, both for better or for worse, is as intense as it ever has been. Because I think the kind of global community, but particularly the business world, but the internet, if we can call it in terms that my mum would probably use, but the World Wide Web, has a real way of finding out whether you are legit or not very quickly, and whether what you're saying has merit to it. So we often find this when I'll sit down with a client and they'll say, we want to showcase our culture, or we want to showcase what our values are, and then we ask them, what are your values?
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, what sometimes they'll be like, what does someone else say? What did someone else say? And that's when we have to immediately step in. It happens less and less, but sometimes you have to immediately step in and say, that's the problem straight away. Because if you're trying to showcase authenticity by looking at someone else, you're lying to yourself and you're lying to other people around you. And that's why the first step in, whether you're a social media influencer on TikTok trying to gain followers, demonstrating that you're a really good chef, or you're a 100 billion firm looking to show that the research capabilities that your firm has are better than anyone else's, before you go out and even start telling stories, figure out what it is that you want people to find out about you. What are the 3 key messages that you want people to know? Because if you don't do that groundwork, you will get punished for it later on, because either you will be telling a story that isn't 100% true to yourself, or you will run out of evidence of what you've been doing. Whereas with Apple, or a Nike, or brands who have managed to last this kind of, test of time, they've been able to do it because what they said or what they created, whether it be a word or a value, they lived by it every single day. And so I think on their behalf, actually, storytelling can be very easy if you come up and agree the right message to begin with, whereas storytelling can be an absolute pain
100%.
if you're trying to force it.
So I think it can be really painful for people who are using the same words and using the same values and otherwise, because in essence, what you're now doing is, so let's use, as I said, Apple with AI, like I said, or some other new company comes up with AI, right? If you say pretty much, or as the example you said, what's our values? Well, what are the values of some company that I look up to and have heard of, right? If you have, let's do like for like, apples and apples, right? We sell apples, you sell apples. We're then going to use marketing spend to basically bombard everyone to say that to see our apples and to know our apples over your apples, so that they buy our apples and not your apples, right? That's if we use apples and apples. If I go apples and Braeburn and everyone says apples, well, Braeburn's different. So I can now do absolutely new ad spend in that area. If we go in any ad spend or new conversation in that area, and actually say it's different. Whether it is or not. And I almost go back to that thing of like, for me, again, kind of humanize it or making the human analogies. I would say it's important for people to know who they are. And then once you know who you are, which is a very difficult thing, do we know who we are? We don't know.
I'm still trying to figure myself out.
Exactly. but because if not, what it is, it's like the world of business I see, and the world of communications and business and brands and stuff, it's like the schoolyard. So again, going back to the goths, I want to be a goth. Okay, well, what do you want to wear? Okay, well, what's Alex, like the head goth or the coolest goth in the school wearing, right? Oh, well, he says now it's, red and white socks. I'm going to go and get red and white socks. Shock horror, red and white socks starts to spike and everyone's buying red and white socks. But then the thing is, you're now trying to compete with the person. You need to be the first, right? This is the whole thing in business. You've got to be the first. You've got to spend the most in money thing. And that's because you're both saying the same thing, right? But then here's the scary part, right? If you say, well, I like the elements of goth, but I also like elements of, High School Musical. I'm just putting things out. And for some reason, I'm a bit of a fusion, or you know what? I'm neither of them. I'm this other thing. And you go out there, and the problem is you're going out completely by yourself. People can love and hate you, right? Or hate you, right? Or they can be indifferent, right? So in that space, you are completely naked and laid bare. And any criticism that comes is not against your group with all your kind of cohorts behind you. It is literally just against you. And I think that's the thing that is really scary for people, because essentially you're asking a founder, assuming it's a founder and not a body corporate that's, got the 50th CEO. You're asking the founder to expose him or herself. To be vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And in doing that, have some people say, I don't necessarily care for you or that, right? And I think great examples in there, it's Surreal, it's a British brand, a cereal brand, they're selling cereal, but they're selling it with their own kind of, love them or hate them, with their own kind of feeling a brand. And Liquid Death, they're selling water. The most ubiquitous liquid, on Earth / in the universe, I have no idea. But they're doing it in their own way. And again, you love them or you hate them, right?
Well, I think it goes back to something we discussed at the beginning, which is what does marketing actually look like nowadays versus the past? I really think that, partly due to the channels that are available today that weren't before, which is, targeted marketing based on demographic data and audience segmentation and whatnot. I think what's become apparent to myself, definitely in not just in the working world, but even, in my personal life, looking around, is that more and more the most successful new brands coming out today are not trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's I think that is a real change which has taken place probably since the turn of the century, but I think particularly in recent years, which is the more you try to fit in with the language that everyone else is using, the more forgettable you will become very quickly.
Yeah.
And the more people you try to appeal to, if you go too wide too early, counterintuitively, the less people you will appeal to, because you'll be a jack of all trades rather than a master of any.
Yeah.
And so if you're launching a cereal brand, don't try be Kellogg's.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be Kellogg's and you don't want to be Kellogg's. Focus on what are the key pillars of your product. And so I think I've seen cereal come on. I think they maybe have like a higher protein content, and I think they have a nice story about the founder whose dad didn't maybe believe in him initially. But so the people you're trying to appeal to there are probably young professionals in the UK who have some interest in fitness and healthy eating, but have an element of nostalgia for cereals, which is often a child's food.
Yeah.
And so if you look at their marketing, they have very much chosen those 2-3 values, key messages to focus on, and then the stories they put out seamlessly flowed into that. Whereas if they came out and started describing themselves, I can't tell you how many firms we come across who describe themselves as global brands, and then we ask them how many offices they have, and they're like, well, we're in London and New York, and that's pretty. And we once traveled to Tokyo.
Yeah.
And that's cool if you're not a global brand. That's absolutely fine. Be proud of where you are and what you've done.
Yeah.
Be by all means globally focused in your world outview, but don't describe yourselves as something just because you think describing yourself as it is a manifestation of that happening further down the line.
100%.
Be completely true to yourself, and which is why, again, going back to the concept of story being king, it's why human beings are the focal point of so many firms, people's businesses, products, communications, whether that be incorporating influencers in, Instagram and TikTok marketing. I don't know if I'm the target demographic for a lot of these products, but I'm probably too old for quite a few of them. But I think the idea of bringing things to life via human beings has never been more important. And you know what? When we hopefully sit down and have this conversation in 10 years' time, it will be 100 times more important. Because the more things get automated, the more businesses that pop up, individuals that 100%. Pop up. You've got these. I saw this thing the other day. It was an Instagram account, which was it was a female promoting some kind of clothing brands, and then about a year into the profile, and they had about 100k followers, and it found out that the woman was AI.
Oh, really?
And she was never real, and the idea was to not, don't be duped by things that seem real but aren't. The impetus and the need to tell stories that are provable and believable will be more and more important, and the descriptors which sound all like each other, I think, will fade away more and more. And any firm
100%.
or individual who does that will suffer the consequences of it very quickly.
So I think most people, even when they start a business or when they do any undertaking, most people, what they want to do is fit in.
Yeah.
And, if you know that all finance things have this thing, right? The blue is the color and and they don't have any, what do you call it? Then in essence, you don't appeal, like you're not going to stand out, right? You're not going to be this square peg in round hole, the red dot amongst all the, whatever dots, but you'll fit in. And I think that fitting in, is comforting. Again, you're not being vulnerable. And so I think that even in amongst all of the things that we're seeing in social media, I think that even these personalities, so the positive they're going to have, the great thing they're going to have is that it is a real person. I mean, apart from this AI, but you know what I mean? Assuming you're doing the thing, it's a real person and you're seeing the person go around. But even the things that they do are going to become increasingly banal and vanilla in order to fit in. Oh, that's this type of person, that type of person, otherwise.
Yeah, well, I mean, it plays into that sort of, isn't it, a classic kind of marketing persona term, which is that, if I am X, therefore, then I am Y. So which is basically saying, for example, if I live in East London, I like craft beers. Or if I am there, And that extent, and it's actually, I mean, this is speaking more on a personal level. It's actually, I think it's one of the great problems that we have today, which is, I think human beings are incredibly tribal, but I also think the way consumer behaviors, political behaviors move nowadays, it's almost as if you can bucket the entire, we can't say world, but let's say you can bucket the entire UK into 10 buckets. Because if you voted for Brexit, then you are incredibly right wing, and if you're incredibly right wing, then you don't live in London. And all of these things might apply to some individuals, but actually it's a lot more nuanced, and there might be someone who is one of those things, but not two others. And it's the same as if you're a consumer and you shop at Zara, it doesn't mean that you love Joe and the Juice.
Exactly.
Even though there might be a high portion of that.
Exactly.
And what will, I think, again, it's, and not trying to force the issue, but it really helps because of the framing of our conversation today. When we go back to stories, I think what will be a really interesting thing to observe, and I'm not sure I know exactly how it's going to go, but I think there is going to have to be something that happens with the personalization of storytelling, i.e., the internet already nowadays is being tailored to me, Alex. The things I see are because I am who I am, and I visit the websites I visit, I buy the products, I follow the people I follow. What I think might start happening is that whether firms will be able to do it in the next 2 years, I'm not sure, but certainly within the next 10, 15 years, I can really picture a situation where brands will tell you a story that is relevant to you. So they'll know, they might know who you are based on the way you've interacted with them in the past, but the story that you get told will have been tailored
for almost your maximum felicity.
For your maximum respect. Exactly. Like in the same way, and it actually it might sound a bit dystopian and terrifying.
It does.
I don't think it necessarily is that, because if you think about it, right? If you and I went to the pub together after this, which if you're free we should do, and I brought along a friend, and I told you that friend works in healthcare, and you thought of a good story to tell them, you would naturally start to think of a story that might be more relevant to that 100%. Person than your preset story. So actually, that being transposed, if that's the right word, if that being seen more in the kind of consumer sales business world, I don't think will be anything surprising. I guess the question that lingers, and it's interesting to see what your thoughts are on it. I guess the question that lingers is, will a marketing persona of you online actually be quite a dangerous thing, because it will have pigeonholed you and not allow you any room for maneuver as to how you view the world or what you're interested in.
So I think there's there are two things about that I would find dystopian. One is the last thing you said exactly, which is that it is, I mean, for me, the engineer hat speaking, and also the human hat speaking, hopefully always wear, hopefully, right, is like a person is obviously far more than their consumption practices and travels and otherwise, right? And so it does end up pigeonholing you, right? And then also, in that very specific, for example, the example you gave, that given how specific the more specific and particular the pigeonhole, the higher the boundary, right, of things you need to do, or the threshold of things you need to do, or the higher the threshold, let's say, with the boundary of things you need to do in order to get out of that hole and go to the other, right? And then I think the second kind of dystopian or dystopic thing about it is that I think the reason, go into, again, Alexander the Great's going to come up.
He's back in the room.
The reason I think in the human condition we are drawn to powerful characters, and those powerful characters don't bend or appease themselves to ourselves. They may communicate what they want to talk about and their beliefs, knowing that you are a communication or financial, let's say, or healthcare professional, or you grew up in this area or that area. They may find things, analogies and metaphors in common, context in common, to express what the same message they want to express. But there is their message, which is as uncompromising, and as they've grown, and as we know the hero's journey, you go through the hardship in order to really rubber stamp and go, not that I'm completely immovable, but through experience, through hopefully logic and evidence and understanding and knowledge, I've come to this particular way of, this belief in the world, and belief, almost model of the world, a model of human beings, which can be changed with evidence, but it is, let's say, quite robust.
Yeah.
And for me, that is a leader. And somebody who, a brand, let's say, again, using that as an avatar as a human being, a brand that almost morphs itself, and maybe tell me if I've got it wrong, but morphs itself to tell a story, because I do think it will most likely tell a story, yes, about what it is, i.e. the product, but I just feel, again, it probably won't tell a story about itself that is specific to you. And so in essence, it ends up becoming this whole thing of, look, it's max. What can I do, almost like a drug, what can I do to you or for you to give you the maximum amount of emotion for you to do the thing that I want you to do? And that's quite dystopic, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, it makes me question the argument further, because in some ways, you're completely right. If we look at the laws of attraction, or even, let's go even further back, or more simple, let's go to playground.
Yeah.
The rules of the playground. Playing hard to get is something that actually continues to work in the corporate world.
Yeah.
As much as it did when you were playing Kiss Chase when you were 12 years old.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that when you're looking to invest somewhere, buy something, their scarcity value of things can never be understated. You always, as you said, human beings are tribal. You always want to feel part of something that feels like an exclusive club. If I'm on the receiving end of endless curated stories, adverts from a brand, sending them to me, which I can tell because, I'm alive and witnessing these things, and we're all aware of the trends that are going on. You're right. It might make me think, why are they pushing this so hard to me? Like, why do they need me so desperately that they're going to tell me things which really make me feel a certain way? It will almost feel a bit intrusive, perhaps, if it moves in that direction. I don't think that negates the point about storytelling becoming more personalized. I think that will take place.
Yeah.
But in terms of whether that will work with consumers, it's a really interesting point you raised there, because actually the true leaders that, emerge in the next 10, 15, 20 years in the business, product, let's say kind of sales world will possibly be those who are so unapologetically themselves that they actually tell their story for those to whom it's interesting, and then stay right there and say, this is who I am.
100%.
If you want me,
come. Because it's always going to 100%, and it's always going to be you're going to get your initial tribe, your first responders, so to speak, your first adopters, your initial tribe, right? The initial 5, 10, 15, maybe 1,000, 500 people. They're going to spread what you're doing via word of mouth. Right. And then eventually, if you continue in that vein, people are going to fall in love with the journey and the story, right? The hardship, the modeling of things, right? That's the thing that's going to, I think, bring people over to what you're doing and appeal to what you do. And then over time, you potentially come the mainstream, right? But I think, and I go back to that point of, here's an apple, here's a phone, here's a person, right? Our tendency is, let's raise money, let's get as much money as we can, and let's push it. Let's be first, or let's push it as hard as we can. And then maybe we'll be the ones who come out on top, but not necessarily because we are, whatever this means, the most genuine, or not the most genuine, not necessarily because of who we are, but because of literally we have titillated people to that degree, or we've been so much in their face that they've almost, to some degree, caved in, and I know I need an apple, let me buy that apple. And I think, by definition, we're only ever going to have, if we're talking about brands and storytellers, they're only ever going to be a handful, relatively speaking, of storytellers, and therefore powerful brands in the world at any one time.
Definitely.
Do
you think? Well, and do you think? I mean, I guess a question as we maybe move to rounding. I guess one of the questions is, in some ways, is over storytelling? That's perhaps not the best word, but is overtelling your story something that might cause you more issues from a messaging perspective than provide benefits? And what I mean by that is, if we look at businesses today, the amount of touch points they have with their consumer has never been higher, right? So if you're your Coca-Cola advert in Mad Men in the 1970s, your touch points with your consumer were probably seeing your product in a supermarket and maybe seeing a billboard somewhere or a cutout from a newspaper. Nowadays, companies have endless touch points with you. If Coca-Cola wants to target you, they will target you. They will find you in a Liam Neeson kind of way. They will find you and they will sell you their product. I guess one of the questions I'd love to get your take on is, does that run the risk of firms maybe taking it too far with potentially well-intentioned storytelling, but actually going into overkill mode with it, thinking that if we need to keep our tribe active, we need to continue telling them our story over and over again? And is there an option or a chance that firms who actually have a bit more self-confidence in their message and don't go on that proactive front too much and actually strategically get their messages out every now and then, but actually sit back, they might be the long-term winners? Or do you think the way in kind of the attention economy is structured, proactivity is the only way to go?
So obviously, proactivity is a good thing, but I think in trying to answer that, I think that we I remember when I was in school and the smartphones and stuff wasn't out. I'm sure, similarly. There was a thing called that a teacher told me about in terms of information overload. Right. I genuinely think, as you said, with these, it may as well be infinite touch points. I think we're not aware of our information overload and how we're bombarded. I genuinely believe that if I use this example to try to answer your question, we find when we look at individuals on Instagram, normally figures that are really well, like they do their thing, people follow their story, especially if you're musicians, I think one in particular, they post extremely infrequently.
Yeah.
On Instagram or LinkedIn or what have you, but normally Instagram.
Yeah.
But they have extremely high engagement. Whereas, as you know, you've got other people who are trying to start out or other people who are actually a good level who might post every hour God gives and their engagement is not as high. I genuinely believe that the most attractive stories and the most attractive people, not attractive in any physical sense, but attractive in personality, they attract people.
Yes.
And people look for them and are happy to wait in a treat them mean, keep them keen way, are happy to wait for them to respond or for them to give them their attention. And I just generally believe that people who really, so using Coca-Cola, I know they need to sell more units, that kind of infinite growth or wanting to grow all the time, and so because I think Coca-Cola is a I don't necessarily drink it, but I think it's a good brand, at least, and the message is really strong.
Yeah, I think it'd be that difficult hill to die on.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I do think that you've got many people who, with all due respect, don't have a good message or don't have a differentiated message or an attractive message necessarily. Not a ugly message, but just not a differentiated and attractive message. They will push to sell. And we do know that if I bombard you with a word enough or with a song enough, you will walk out there singing that song, right? And the question is whether that is a conversion, if you think about it. And it's a win because you've done thingy.
Yeah.
But is that what you want?
How do you measure success in that regard?
Exactly. If that makes sense.
Yeah.